For NBA stars, how they make their exit from the league more often than not is a big indicator of the amount of success that they found in the NBA. Whether it be Dwayne Wade in the farewell tour that he just had this past season, as he could always be found exchanging jerseys with his favorite players from the opposing teams after playing them, or Kobe Bryant and his much bigger farewell tour, even ending his career in the most Kobe way possible by scoring 60 points in his final game against the Utah Jazz. These were a couple of former NBA superstars who went out with a bang, went out in a way that was deserving of the careers that they had put together. Not all stars though required a big or fancy exit, however. In 2016, it was well perceived that Tim Duncan was playing his final year in the NBA. Yet there was still no farewell tours or fancy performances or even posts on Instagram from the NBA or Duncan himself highlighting his final game, as Duncan decided to go out more quietly, preferring not to make a big deal of himself, which I suppose was to be expected from a player with a nickname such as Mr. Fundamental, and the same thing can be said for his longtime teammate Monta Ellis, who also preferred to drift quietly into the sunset. And then there are also some stars who, even though they are still regarded as some of the best to ever play the game, didn't go out in the most glorifying of ways. For example, Allen Iverson, who after being the man in Philly and also having a good couple of years in Denver, spent the final years of his career looking like a shell of his former self, playing for teams such as the Detroit Pistons and the Memphis Grizzlies, before officially hanging it up during the summer of 2013. 3 whole years after he had played his final NBA game. However, while Iverson may not have had the exit from the league that he envisioned back in his heyday, it's safe to say that there are still other NBA players, even players who were once all-star caliber players, that had even less memorable exits from NBA stardom. Players who seemingly vanished from the league while leaving no trace behind that they were there in the first place. And that is what we're going to be taking a look at today. 3 former NBA stars who were here one day and gone the next. So without further ado, let's get right into this. Coming straight to the NBA out of Oak Hill Academy, Josh Smith was seen as a bit of a gamble by most NBA teams. While he had the size and athleticism to make it into the league, his lack of maturity as well as lack of any range on the offensive end of the floor were 2 huge concerns that NBA teams had with Smith coming into the draft. For that reason, instead of being selected in the NBA lottery, Smith was taken just outside of the lottery as a 17th overall pick by the Atlanta Hawks back in 2004. Despite that though, for a high school player coming straight to the NBA, the rookie year that Smith was able to put together could be seen as nothing less than a massive success, as his athleticism around the rim allowed him to make an immediate impact on both ends of the floor. On offense, he was known for his high-flying dunks and acrobatic finishes, and then on the defensive end of the floor, the rookie Smith quickly proved that he had what it takes to be one of the best defenders and rim protectors in the league, as he went on to put up an impressive 10 points, 7 rebounds, as well as a whopping 1.9 blocks per game. The cherry on top for Smith being the fact that he was also able to win the slam dunk contest his rookie year as well. You had better believe that back in 04-05, the Josh Smith hype was real, as most expected him to develop into one of the best two-way players that the league would have to offer. And as the years progressed, the notion of Smith becoming one of the league's brightest and most athletic stars didn't stop, with some online publications even comparing the athleticism of Smith to the athleticism of NBA phenom LeBron James, as throughout his first 3 years in the league, Josh Smith continued to get better and better, upping his scoring to over 17 points per game to go along with 8 rebounds, 3 assists, and just a shade under 3 blocks per game as well. A player coming out of high school to average 17, 8, 3, and 3 in just his 3rd year seemed destined to eventually have his name enshrined in the Basketball Hall of Fame. The only thing holding Smith back at the time was his lack of a jump shot, as throughout his first years in the league, even though he was steadily starting to take more and more outside shots, Smith was still just shooting a horrid 25% from beyond the arc, giving fans a reason to cringe every time Smith would settle for a shot that may as well have been marked as a turnover on the score sheet. Despite that though, during his time with the Atlanta Hawks, even though he never developed an outside shot or became quite as dominant of a player as those who bought into the hype would have liked to have believed, Smith was still always viewed as one of the most athletic forwards that the NBA had to offer, only being held back by, once again, his lack of a jump shot. The real problems for Josh Smith in his career, however, came after he left the Atlanta Hawks to sign with the Detroit Pistons during the summer of 2013. Josh Smith was coming off a year in which he had produced similar numbers to that of which he had been producing his entire career, about 17 points, 8 rebounds, a few assists, as well as a couple of blocks per game. At the time though, he was no longer viewed as an up-and-coming player in the league with limitless potential since he already had 9 full seasons under his belt. Everyone already knew exactly who Josh Smith was, a player who could be a game changer on the defensive end. But if your plan as a coach or a general manager was to have Smith be the main focal point of your offense, well then, to put it quite frankly, you weren't going to have a very good offense or win many games. Still though, that didn't stop Detroit from signing Smith to a 4-year, $54 million contract as soon as the clock struck noon on free agency. And $54 million today might not seem like a big price to pay for a player who was supposed to be their star player, but back then, a player like John Wall could only sign a max 5-year deal with the Wizards that was worth around $80 million, so $54 million over 4 years was approaching the max contract range. And the plan the Pistons had was to buck the trend that the NBA was headed in. Teams were just beginning to experiment with small ball lineups, and three-point shooting was becoming more and more prevalent by the day. For the Pistons though, their ideology was that if they could assemble one of the biggest teams in the league, that they could win games by playing bully ball in the paint. Their plan was simply to out-muscle their opponents, and that is why, for over the next 112 games that spanned the course of 2 seasons, they touted a starting lineup that included Josh Smith, Greg Monroe, as well as Andre Drummond. And because of that alone, needless to say, that this move was a complete and utter failure, as the Pistons finished the season with an abysmal record of 29-53. And after one horrendously disappointing season and just 28 games into the next season, even though he was technically then the highest paid player in Pistons history, Detroit felt their only option to improve was by waiving Josh Smith and paying him not to play for them, something that they are still doing to this very day. And of course, not only did getting waived by the Pistons signal the end of Smith's days in Detroit, but in the NBA as well, as after he was let go, Smith bounced around a few more teams, including the Houston Rockets, Los Angeles Clippers, as well as the New Orleans Pelicans, each of which wielding far less than impressive results. But in the end, Josh Smith found himself outside of the NBA, as no matter who was coaching him or what teammates he shared the court with, Smith refused to accept the fact that he couldn't shoot. And that's despite the fact that he was still shooting the same 25% from 3 that he had been for his entire career, while taking around 3 to 4 threes per game with each the Pistons, Rockets, and Clippers. It doesn't feel like too long ago that Brandon Jennings set the NBA world on fire by scoring the most points by any rookie since the late 1960s, when he scored 55 points against the rookie Stephen Curry and the Golden State Warriors. Like Josh Smith, Brandon Jennings was another player who decided to forego his college experience. Unlike Smith though, instead of making the jump straight from high school to the NBA, Jennings decided to spend some time playing basketball overseas instead, signing for a year with a team in Italy before eventually declaring for the 2009 NBA draft. And coming into the NBA draft, there was a lot of mystery surrounding Jennings amongst the scouts, as people were just unsure of how good he was or when he would be drafted. Some thought that he could be taken early on in the lottery, while others didn't think that he would be a lottery pick at all. And the main reason there was so much mystery surrounding Jennings as a player was because scouts weren't able to watch him play during high school. And then during his time in Italy, Jennings didn't get to see the court much. He himself even wrote a letter warning other high school players stateside that going overseas instead of college wasn't the best idea due to how they were treating him, as well as the lack of quality minutes on a night-to-night basis. Despite that though, the Milwaukee Bucks decided to roll the dice on the 6'1", 170-pound point guard, selecting him as the 10th overall pick and handing him the keys to their future, as the Bucks have been struggling to gain relevance in the East since the days of Michael the Red. And as I mentioned, at first, it seemed as if the Bucks' confidence that Jennings could be the player they needed to turn their franchise around was going to pay off big time. Dude scored 55 points as a rookie, something that hadn't been done in over 40 years and still hasn't been done since. And during the course of his rookie career, even though he wasn't consistent on the offensive end by any stretch of the imagination, only shooting 37% from the field, the promise and upside of Jennings was still clear to see as he averaged over 15 points and 5 assists per game throughout his rookie campaign. However, it didn't take long for the Bucks, or the rest of the league for that matter, to realize that Jennings might not have been the player that everyone thought he could be. He continued to score, almost averaging 20 points per game to go along with the same 5.5 assists that he averaged during his rookie season 3 years into the league, but his overall shooting percentage hadn't gone up much, and his usage rate was now at an all-time high. Jennings, to many, was considered to be a volume scorer, and he, like Josh Smith, was starting to gain the overall image of a black hole on the offensive end. And that is why just 4 short years into his career, the Bucks had seen enough from Jennings to send him over to the Detroit Pistons in exchange for a package that included Brandon Knight as well as Chris Middleton. As for Jennings, he was a part of that same dysfunctional Detroit Pistons team that Josh Smith was on. And even though his assist numbers did rise from 5.5 assists per game to 7.5 assists per game his first year with the club, the rest of Jennings' offensive game remained the same, as he was still very inconsistent when it came to shooting the ball, averaging just 15 points per game on 37% shooting from the field. But for the most part, Jennings was able to avoid catching too much flack from the fans, as it was widely known that the biggest problem with the Detroit Pistons wasn't Jennings. Once again, it was the pairing of Josh Smith alongside Greg Monroe and Andre Drummond. It would be hard for any guard in the league to be able to facilitate an offense that had as poor floor spacing as the Pistons did. And after the Pistons waived Josh Smith, it became even more apparent that he was the one holding back not just the Pistons as a team, but Brandon Jennings as a player as well. Since right after Smith was released, Jennings caught fire. With the floor spacing improving tenfold, the quick and wiry point guard was running circles around the opposing defenses. His assist numbers were up, his shooting percentages were up, and his scoring skyrocketed. And the Pistons themselves, they were rolling, as after they had gotten off to another lottery-bound start, all of a sudden it seemed like they were poised to make a huge playoff push, led by none other than Brandon Jennings himself. The hype was real, until it wasn't. As not too long afterwards, Brandon Jennings suffered an injury that would effectively doom the rest of his NBA career. When in an inbound play against the Milwaukee Bucks, Jennings collapsed with a torn Achilles, an injury that has ended or altered the careers of every player before him who had suffered it. And for Jennings, it unfortunately would be no different, as the very next season, Detroit replaced Jennings by trading for disgruntled OKC backup point guard Reggie Jackson, and Jennings found himself bouncing in and out of the league and from team to team, never regaining the form that he previously had, spending time with teams such as the Orlando Magic, New York Knicks, Washington Wizards, and then another very short stint with the Milwaukee Bucks, before disappearing entirely from the league at the end of the 2018 NBA season. Before Klay Thompson became the famed backcourt mate of 2-time MVP and 3-time NBA champion Stephen Curry, it was widely perceived that Monta Ellis, the lightning quick combo guard who was taken 40th overall by Golden State in the 2005 NBA draft, was going to form one of the scariest backcourt in the league next to Curry once Curry developed a bit more and stayed healthy, as Ellis was a fan favorite amongst the Warriors. Here was a guy who was taken with the 40th overall pick, a spot in the draft that is mostly reserved for players who will either spend most of, if not their entire time in the league, in the developmental league, or simply just not stick around the NBA for long at all. And yet here's Ellis, someone who quickly managed to become one of the best scorers that the league had to offer, upping his scoring from just 6 points per game as a rookie to just under 17 points per game his sophomore year in the league, eventually scoring during his 5th season with the Warriors, where he averaged 25 points per game while shooting 45% from the field. Eventually though, speculations started to arise surrounding a long-term backcourt pairing of Ellis and Curry, as they were both simply too small to share a backcourt together. On defense, they were getting exposed, and on offense, while they were both good scorers, the two of them didn't have the best overall chemistry together. It became clear that there would only be room for one of them going forward with the Warriors, which most people thought would be Ellis. After all, at the time, he was the better scorer and some would say the better player, especially since there was a lot of concern surrounding Stephen Curry and his ability to stay healthy, since he was constantly battling ankle injuries. Despite that though, we all know how it turned out. The Warriors, going against what seemed to be better judgment at the time, decided that it would be best to hand Stephen Curry the reins to their future, as Golden State traded Ellis to the Milwaukee Bucks before the start of the 2011-2012 season, pairing him with another high-volume guard in Brandon Jennings, a backcourt pairing that the Bucks thought they would be able to use in order to gain relevance in the league as well. And it kinda worked. The Bucks were able to make the playoffs, but only as the 8th seed, and despite Brandon Jennings talking a big game before going up against LeBron James and the Miami Heat, the outcome was exactly what everyone thought it would be. A 4-game sweep. And after one more season of watching the backcourt of Ellis and Jennings taking turns jacking up shot after shot, it became clear that just like the pairing of Curry and Ellis, Jennings and Ellis were simply too small and too similar players to be sharing backcourt together. Ellis in particular seemed to struggle mightily playing next to Jennings, as while he was a 20-point scorer all but his first 2 years with the Warriors, he failed to average 20 points per game in either of his 2 seasons in Milwaukee, his overall efficiency taking a nosedive as well. And after those 2 years with the Bucks, Ellis was on to his next team, the Dallas Mavericks, where he would now be playing alongside one of the greatest power forwards that the league has ever seen in Dirk Nowitzki, a pairing that worked out pretty well for Ellis actually, as he was able to gain a lot of efficiency back that he had lost with the Bucks, bumping his scoring total back up to just under 20 points per game while also shooting 45% from the field. And while the Mavericks didn't win a championship or anything, they still finished the season with a 49-33 record and pushed the dominant San Antonio Spurs to the edge in a very tough 7-game series in the first round of the playoffs. While Ellis was seen by many as a player with shot-checking habits and a complete liability on the defensive end, his time with the Mavericks did help mitigate the couple of rough years that he had with the Bucks, as he was now once again seen as a player who could help out any team who needed some extra scoring from their guard. And during the summer of 2015, there was one NBA team in particular who felt that they could really utilize the offense of Monta Ellis, the Indiana Pacers, as they signed Ellis to a 4-year, $44 million deal, hoping that he could be the offensive spark necessary to finally help Paul George get past LeBron James in the Eastern Conference. Didn't quite work out that way though, as Ellis with the Pacers was a complete nightmare. Look, the NBA had already been drifting towards guards being required to be able to knock down an outside shot. The days of players not being able to shoot the 3-ball and still being seen as offensive threats were coming to an end. And even though Ellis was a great scorer and finisher on the rim, never in his career was he considered a good or even average shooter from deep, most years struggling to shoot 30% from beyond the arc. And that, combined with his lack of defensive ability, saw him plummet from being one of the better guards in the league to a player whom, even though he was technically still in the prime of his career, could no longer cut into the NBA, his scoring total dropping all the way down to just 13 points per game in his first year with Indiana, and even worse at less than 9 points per game the year following, with the result being Indiana using the stretch provision to waive Ellis at the conclusion of the 2016-2017 season, officially marking the end of Ellis's time playing in the NBA, as no team since has wanted to roll the dice on a defensive liability who couldn't shoot further than 18 to 20 feet away from the rim. That's it though. Those are 3 players who are once some of the most hyped players in the league, with all-star or even some fans thought had superstar potential, that just disappeared from the NBA. This was a much longer video, but I still hope that you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, then be sure to subscribe to the channel with post notifications turned on so you don't miss out on future videos. As always though, thank you so much for watching. You guys already know that you are the real MVPs, and with that being said, until next time, keep getting the buckets, Team SDC, and I'm out of here. Peace!